Hỡi các đồng chí đang cố chinh phục tiếng Việt, một ngôn ngữ vô cùng khó khăn. Có lẽ là bạn đã được dạy là tiếng Việt có 6 thanh điệu. Đúng là người Việt Nam sẽ nói với bạn như vậy. Nhưng mà mình muốn chia sẻ một bí mật đã hoàn toàn thay đổi cách suy nghĩ của mình về tiếng Việt. Thực ra là tiếng Việt có 8 thanh điệu. Bạn không tin đúng không? Hãy xem tiếp video này để hiểu tại sao nhé.
Ok, và trước khi tiếp tục, các bạn hãy nhớ rằng TVO vẫn đang cung cấp các khóa học tiếng Việt online, offline, 1-1 và lớp nhóm. Hãy nhanh tay đăng ký vào email đây nhé.
Em xong chưa?
Rồi.
Ok. So, right now you're probably thinking, wait, 8 tones? I thought there were only 6. What are the other 2? Well, I'll explain in a lot more detail later, but for now what you need to understand is that there's 2 different types of zosak, and there's 2 different types of zonap. And once I figured this out, my Vietnamese pronunciation actually improved so much. And before we move on, I just want to say I'm not the first person to come up with the idea of an 8-tone system in Vietnamese. There's actually a number of linguists who have done a lot of research, and they've pointed out that the 8-tone system is just a more accurate and consistent way of describing the Vietnamese language. And also, it's just one way of analyzing the language. There's lots of different ways you can describe the phonology of Vietnamese, but I found this one extremely helpful for me. So I don't want to start any arguments about which one is correct. It's more that if you're a Vietnamese learner, I think you'll find this helpful. Now, be warned, this is going to get a little bit complicated. I don't want to be too much of a linguistics nerd, but I am going to delve into some of the phonology of Vietnamese, basically. I'm going to simplify as much of the jargon as I can, just to make it easier for you guys to understand. So, you might have already noticed that there's 2 different kinds of syllables in Vietnamese, but I'm going to talk about those a little bit. So you've got what I would call hard syllables and soft syllables. Soft syllables make up maybe 70 to 80% of the words in Vietnamese, and that's any word that ends in a vowel or ends in a soft consonant. So that's n, m, or ny. And these soft syllables, as I call them, can take any one of the 6 Vietnamese tones that you've probably already learned. So a famous example would be ma can have 6 different tones that you may have already learned. Ma, 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 ma. The second kind of syllable is hard syllables, and these are syllables that end in what I would call a hard consonant. So that's going to be k, t, p, or ch. And now these syllables can only ever have one of 2 tones. You can either have zosak or you can have zonap. So one example of this would be the word Viet or Viet can have one of those 2 tones, but it can't take a zonga. You can't say Viet. That's never going to be a word. So here's a table that I made, which might help you make sense of it. Feel free to pause the video now just to have a look, because there's quite a lot of information here. But also just quickly note how I've lined up the consonants. I've lined up N with T. I've lined up the NG with the C. Why did I do this? Because N and T, you actually put your tongue in the same place to make these sounds. You kind of put your tongue just behind your teeth to make an N. You also do that to make a T sound. Same with the ng sound. Your tongue goes in the exact same place as you would to make a k sound. This will become really important later. So we have 2 different kinds of syllables. We have soft syllables, which can have any one of the 6 tones. And we've got hard syllables, which can only have one of 2 tones. Now, the point of this video is to explain that the hard tones, the sak and the nak, the hard syllables, are actually 2 completely different tones to the 6 that you get on the soft syllables. So before we start talking about the 2 different kinds of zonap, we have to talk about glossal stops. So if you didn't already know this, the zonap in Vietnamese on a soft consonant is made with a glossal stop, which is when you use your throat to block off the air. If you're a native English speaker, this will probably be quite easy for you. We do it all the time. So for example, when we say Batman, We never say Batman, that's completely unnatural. We say Batman. It's just like a zonat. So the way you block off your throat like that is how we use zonat on a word that ends in a vowel. So for example, the word la, meaning strange, you just block it off with the throat with a glottal stop. La. So now let's talk about the two different kinds of zonat. In particular, we're going to be comparing two different nat words. We've got do, which means cave, and we've got do, which means poison. Now, it took me endlessly struggling to differentiate between these two words, which got me to realize that there are two different kinds of zonat in the first place. So that's why I'm going to use them as an example. Now, to say do, as in poison, just like we would with any word that ends in a uka, orka, or arka, we're going to have to kind of close our lips and make a p sound with our lips at the same time as we make a k sound with our tongue. So it's going to be like do. Now, to say do, as in cave, like we would with khum, we have to close our lips to make an sound at the same time as we pull our tongue back to make a sound. So, but unlike with khum, this is a zonat word, which means, again, because it's a soft zonat, we have to put a glottal stop in it. So we kind of cut all our air off like halfway through the word. So we don't say dom, we say dom. Now let's go back to that vowel chart I made before. We can see that n and k, your tongue goes in the same place. The only difference between these words, these sounds, is that to make a k sound, you block all of this air out, and to make a n sound, you just let all the air out through your nose. Now, but because we have a glottal stop in here, we do actually stop the air coming out when we say do. And when we stop the air coming out when we say n, it turns into a k. So if you're saying the word for cave correctly, it should actually sound like you're saying a hard syllable. It should sound like do. So if both do and do have a C sound at the end, and they both have a zonat, then what's the difference between them? Well, I struggled with that for a really long time. And what I realized is the difference is the tone. Specifically, the word do occurs at a higher pitch than the word do, as in poison. Here's a native speaker saying these words.
Do. Do.
So can you tell which one's which? Remember, the soft one, the do, is at a higher pitch, and the do, as in cave, is at a lower one. Listen again and see if you can tell which one is which.
Do. Do.
So if they're both zonat, how could they have different pitches? Well, that's the point I'm trying to make. I want to say that the zonat on a soft syllable is actually a completely different tone to the zonat on a hard syllable, and you need to think of them as different tones. Here's a list of some of the differences between those tones. Now, the most important difference between the two is the difference in pitch. Most Vietnamese learners are taught that nat is a low tone, mainly because it's got that dot underneath it. And it is a low tone, but only if it ends in a P, C, T, or CH. If it ends in anything else, it's actually a medium, slightly creaky tone. Listen to the difference between these two words. We've got nyan mak. The mak is actually at like a higher pitch than the nyan. You don't say nyan mak, you say nyan mak. Compare this with hua hao, where the hao is a hard nat. That's actually a low tone, so we have to say hua hao. We have to pronounce these two words completely differently. Lastly, let's go back to the ending consonant table I showed you before. Remember how with the word do, because it has a zonat, we took the ng, we denasalized it and turned it into a C? Well, we're going to do that with all of our consonants. So let's take a word like ban, right? It ends in an N, but it's got a zonat. So we take that N, we denasalize it, and it sounds like a T. So that's why the word ban sometimes sounds a bit like the word bat at a higher tone. And so we do the same thing with M. So for example, the word nio. The M turns into a bit like a P sound. And lastly, we do the same with the NH. It turns into a CH sound. So, mạnh. To practice, try saying these words. Remember, if it's a hard nap, you go low. If it's a soft nap, you go medium and creaky.
Vì vậy, động vật, thịnh soạn, cộng tác, hết sạch, dọn dẹp, bệnh viện, sập tiệm, bí mật, hóa học,
I found that after I'd figured out this distinction, my pronunciation improved so much. But we're still only halfway through. We still have to talk about the two different kinds of zosak. So just like zonat, we have two different types of zosak that we can distinguish on based on whether it's a hard syllable or a soft syllable. So for the hard sak, we have words like di, bo, kuop, sak. Whereas for the soft sak, we have words like muon or quá or bom. So what's the difference between them? Let's have a look. If you've been learning Vietnamese for a while, you've probably realized something similar to this. Maybe you've been taught that L is a short sound and you've changed your pronunciation according to that, or maybe you don't need to be taught this at all. But if you're a beginner, it's probably worth noting that these two different zosaks have completely different tone, pitch, length patterns. I'd probably been learning Vietnamese for like 2 or 3 months before I tried to say the word d, as in Germany, as a soft sak. I tried to say like duh, and realized that nobody understood me. Now, you've almost certainly been taught that zosak is a high tone, which it is for the hard sak, but not the low one. I think this is because the word sak itself is a hard syllable, and so when you're taught it, you're always taught the high version. But for the soft sak, it's not a high tone at all. It's a low, smooth, rising tone. And in my opinion, the fact that it's low is much more important than the fact that it rises. This distinction is really important when it comes to two-syllable words, which there are loads of in Vietnamese. So, if you're in Vietnamese class, you're going to get taught every word in isolation, basically, and you're going to be taught it really slowly. You've probably been taught the word teacher as giáo viên, but of course, nobody ever speaks that slowly. And when they speak quickly, natural speech, the rising ending of the giáo becomes much less prominent. So when speaking quickly, you would say giáo viên, giáo viên. Notice how much lower the giáo is than the viên. In fact, you could probably even switch it with a huyen, and nobody would have even noticed. If you said giáo viên quickly, it just becomes giáo viên. It's the same thing. So the low is much more important than the rising part. Now, let's compare this with a hard sak two-syllable words like tất nhiên. Now, because the tất is a hard sak, it doesn't have that low rising quality at all. It's just a high, sharp tone. Tất nhiên. Compare this again with giáo viên. They sound completely different. Again, even though they follow the same sak, ngang pattern. Tất nhiên, giáo viên. So in summary, we've got 8 tones total, and the 2 extra tones come from the fact that there's 2 different versions of zosak and zonat, depending on whether or not the word ends in a hard consonant. And these 2 different tones have completely different pitches, contours, everything. So it's best to think of them as 2 different tones if you're learning Vietnamese. I hope you guys found this video useful. I hope I didn't get too nerdy with the linguistics stuff and it wasn't too complicated. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you next time.
And don't forget to like and subscribe subscribe and leave your story in the comment section below. Bye!
Thanks, Nguyen. Bye.